Affiliate sites are just fraud traffic. Why would we even be on affiliate sites? I've heard that more times than I can count over the past 20 years. And look, I get it. There's definitely some sites and actors out there over the years that I've known of that don't do things the right way, that play a gray hat or maybe even black hat kind of strategy at times. I've been in many conversations around that. But at the end of the day, you know, I believe that there are some opportunities there that a lot of us might be missing. At a school I was at, we found an interesting take when we had looked at the traffic that was coming to our website and even traffic that was coming through Google. There's about 20% of those inquiries that were coming in and those leads that were coming into our school that were coming from directory sites and affiliate traffic. And these weren't just junk clicks, these were actual inquiries, applications, and students. And that opened my eye to realizing that there's a lot more than meets the eye. Welcome back to ROI University podcast for higher ed marketers and leaders who want to change the game and themselves. I'm Rusty Rani, your host, former higher ed CMO, and now on the agency side, working with lots of schools and universities and tackling amazing, fun, and challenging marketing problems. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for over 20 years. Back in 2008, 2009, I was working for a marketing company and we were doing a ton of marketing and lead generation or inquiry generation for universities and colleges and schools across the nation. And one of the interesting things there was it was being done through a lot of directory listings and directory sites. So these are sites like collegedegrees.com, gradprograms.com. There's so many different variations of these sites. Now, back in 2008, 2009, it was a different time. And over the years, I've seen many different variations of, these sites. And at the end of the day, the important thing here is what is the traffic that is actually coming to the site? Where is it coming from? How are these prospective students finding this site, getting to the site, engaging with the site? And then when they do engage with the site, what happens afterwards? And so when you start to kind of understand that and you have a good understanding of where some of these sites have come from, how they were built, how long they've been around, that really starts to open up your understanding more of the value of a lot of these sites. Again, at a school that I was at, we built out a model and we had a tool that we were using that would look at and create an ID, a student ID, or not a student ID, but an ID like a G-CLID, like a Google Click ID that would track, basically a pixel that would track a student and see, a lead and see where they would go across sites. And what we realized was when we were tracking it back to the sources of where some of these people that were coming into our site or into our funnel were coming from, we found that 20%, almost 20%, and at times even a little bit more. And I was actually just speaking to somebody else about this week, that in their platform and what they're seeing is almost 24+% of their inquiries that are coming in have at one point in their student journey seen them on one of these directory listing or affiliate sites, which is pretty impactful when you think about it. 1 in 5, 1 in 4 of your prospective students have done some research and seen you on one of these sites, right? Now, the question I always get is, well, Rustam, these affiliate sites, we don't want to be involved. There's fraud. There's a lot of garbage out there, and so on. And honestly, I can't disagree because I've seen some of this over the years. But if you know what you're doing, you know who you're working with, you know how long they've been around, how their sites work, and so on. There are some really, really good sites that are out there. And these sites do absolutely play a role in a student's decision and are impactful in what they're kind of deciding to do. I think, like, look, most marketing and enrollment leaders are looking at, hey, what are the external factors out there? Obviously, there's cost per lead pressures, there's cost per application enrollment pressures, there's limited budgets, there's all of these things to consider. So you're trying to think about, my marketing investment, how can I get it in front of our ideal student most effectively and most efficiently? What channels do I need to be looking at? Where are those touch points? Where are students looking for us? And I think a big area that a lot of people miss in this side, because of the stigma, because of their maybe previous experience, because of what they've just heard, is these affiliate or directory listing sites. We've seen over the years where you can absolutely have success in finding students, ideal students, on these sites. Now, there's a number of things to kind of consider here, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But, it's interesting when you think about, the history of how some of these sites kind of came to be. Back in 2008, again, this is when I got my first exposure. There were a lot of sites that were being pumped out. The actually affiliate ecosystem, just in general, across multiple different industries and verticals, was really taking off. And so basically what Google was seeing was looking for relevant content, relevant information that people were looking for and our students were looking for, right? So if we had a domain called psychologydegrees.com and it had very relevant information on all of the different psychology degrees that are out there, different schools, information, public information, iPads information, all of these different sources that can be kind of combined. These were very valuable sites that Google said, hey, they have a lot of great information. Students can get there, they can have unbiased data and information. And, they were giving these sites a lot of credibility and a lot of credit. And you would see that because the traffic to these sites continued to increase and continue to become, powerful. And what these folks who are building these sites, obviously, on their end, they said, hey, well, we've got these prospective students coming to these sites. How can we give them some options and get them to the schools to talk to them, right? And give them some options for school. So there was a couple, that was kind of like how all of this was built out. Now there's a ton of different ways that things are worked now, where you can do a host and post, which basically you go to one of these sites, you host, they host a form for your school. The prospective student fills out the form, puts in their information, and it goes directly to your CR, goes directly to you. There's also link outs where they'll put a banner for your school, or they'll put a link, a CTA for your school, highlight your school. Maybe it's relevant content. Maybe you have a incredible master's degree that you want to promote it within a relevant article or on a type of site where they can click and get directly to one of your landing pages where they would have a branded experience and then come through that way. There's a lot of different kind of opportunities there. There's sponsored listings on some sites. There's some review sites like Niche and others that are out there. But there are absolutely a number of people that come to these sites that are doing research, that are looking for information that may not come directly to you initially. And this is all a part of their research. Similar to what we have conversations with some of our clients on, whether it's connected TV or it's meta campaigns, the funnel is longer. These are all touch points. These are all awareness campaigns to get people to see who you are. Are you relevant for them? Is it a good fit for them? And if it is, then they'll take that next step and they'll come through and they're more educated. They have a higher intent and they have more insight into what some other options are. So they've already done some of that research. And really, we're seeing a lot of this kind of happening right now where a lot of that information is coming through in the LLMs, right? A lot of people are getting some information beforehand. They're getting a good rundown of information, and then they're more educated when they do come to the site. So we are seeing, and I think I've talked about this, increases in some of the down funnel conversion rates for organic traffic. But again, did they see you somewhere else before? Were you in their mind before? Did they research you before? And so that's really important to kind of keep in mind. And I think, there are a lot of other considerations that students go through that are important, right? And a lot of times you're researching other options, other opportunities, and these sites do a good job of giving a rundown on other options, on strengths, weaknesses. A lot of times they showcase, there's rankings that tie to many different factors. There's articles on online programs that are great for working mothers. There's online programs that are great for people who have full-time jobs. There's all these other factors there that a lot of times this information is out there for people to make better decisions, right? And I think we tend to forget that a lot of the core of what these sites came out, why these sites came out, why these affiliate sites and these directory listings were built was for giving prospective students more information, better information, and resources so they could make a more informed decision, right? And I believe that they've done that. I believe that we've seen how there are, I would say there's at least half a dozen to a dozen very solid partners out there that are continuing to build resources, content, sites, directory listings that are very, very useful and helpful for prospective students to understand what's happening in the market, what are some options, and not only that, but like what are some other down funnel, things that they should consider, career outcomes. There's some great content on career outcomes across many different, schools, and where the top interns land from some of these schools. Like that's very relevant information, right? For somebody who's looking at going back to get their master's. My daughter's actually looking at that. And these are the types of sites that she's looking at to see where do University of Texas students get their jobs and internships, and where do other master's programs, rank as far as like placement in states, because she'd like to stay in the Southeast. There's just so many different things to kind of consider there. I have seen it over the years, many years, that there is a place across, and it's really an omni-channel world, right? Where, again, maybe you've heard that HubSpot talking about this loop versus kind of the direct funnel of how people come in, but they're constantly researching, they're constantly getting information and so on. And is your brand in front of them, creating this awareness, which a lot of these sites help you do? And then B, are you out there where you should be when these conversations are happening. And those are definitely things to kind of keep in mind and consider. And I'm a big believer that for the right sites, for the right content, there is an opportunity to find very high intent prospective students across some of these affiliate sites and directory listings. And I think, I personally was pretty surprised when I saw that 20% of the traffic that we were getting to our site at some point in time saw our brand on one of these sites. To me, that was huge. And that was when I realized the value of this. And again, in my recent conversation, even just this week, it sounds like maybe it might even be more now. So, I think you need to kind of just keep open minded as far as like when channels start to evolve. TikTok is another one. I've had conversations with some presidents who've said, nope, we're not doing TikTok. And now they're open to it. And this was a year and a half, 2 years ago when we had that conversation. And I think over time, just understanding the different ways our students are getting information, where they're finding out about us, it may not be just the areas that we think. And also, I think it's okay to, sometimes give a chance to something where you might have a bias. And that's just because you're not aware of a lot of what's good out there. And I do believe there's some great sites that are out there. So if you haven't tried it, I would definitely recommend. There's probably a few great partners out there to consider, and seeing if you could get your brand listed in the right places at the right time so your students can find you. That's all for this episode of ROI University, where the biggest ROI is personal.